So when we met, when I came out of the plane, and I said, "Good afternoon, dear neighbor. Very good to see you. In good health, and to see you alive." I think that is very neighborly. I think that's some kind words that we can say to each other. We're separated by a strait of Bering, though there are 2 islands only between the Russian island and the U.S. island. They're only 4 kilometers apart. We're close neighbors, and it's a fact. It's also important that Alaska...
some form of a ceasefire. Now, I say this, and I've said it from the beginning, this is really setting the table today. We're going to have another meeting if things work out, which will be very soon. Or we're not going to have any more meetings at all, maybe ever.
Yeah, maybe ever, Trey Gowdy. And that was sort of a warning on his way in. It seems like things are moving forward. We're starting to get some more people filing into the room. Your thoughts on, the next steps and, President Trump selling himself as a peacemaker, and this is the ultimate peacemaker move.
Brett, you can't get a killer to become a good person overnight, maybe not ever. So let's settle for getting them to stop killing. I mean, that's what I heard the president saying. Stop the carnage. Then let's set summit number 2. We can talk about territorial boundaries, security agreements, and the return of 20,000 kidnapped Ukrainian children. But if Putin does not want to engage with Trump, trust me, I was with him last weekend. Trump has a backup plan, and Vladimir Putin is not going to like the backup plan. It's not Trump's war, but he is the leader of the most powerful country on earth, and we do have a role to play in punishing aggressors for picking on smaller countries, and I think Trump is willing to play it, not with American soldier lives, but with trade and secondary trades. He is not going away, even if he doesn't get a ceasefire today.
Both delegations, let's take the press room full if we could. Both delegations have just walked in. We just saw Susan Wiles, the White House Chief of Staff, as well as the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. As I mentioned, Steve Witkoff is in the room. Sergei Lavrov came into the room of the Russian Foreign Minister, who obviously created quite a stir here in Alaska, Senator Sullivan, by wearing a CCCP sweatshirt the other day as he entered, which is obviously the Russian letters for the USSR, maybe playing some kind of psychological game as he walked in. There you see Secretary Rubio as well.
Well, Brett, I mean, one of the things I mentioned to the president, where he was talking to you in your interview about deal making, and I said, and this can go for all the Russians. Another reason it's nice to have this in Alaska is to remind the Russians just what good negotiators we are, including our commander-in-chief. You know, last time Russia and the United States negotiated something involving Alaska, we got a deal for 2 cents an acre, $7.2 million for this great state of mine. I think most people would agree that was the deal of the century, and sometimes the Russians still get a little miffed about that.
As we wait here, this is former Defense Secretary William Cohen. Take a listen to this.
President Eisenhower said, if I have a problem I can't solve, I make it larger. What Putin is doing now, he's got a problem he can't solve, and that's overrun the entire country of Ukraine. So I'll make the problem bigger and tell President Trump and the world, hey, I'm a big, powerful, nuclear-armed country. So it's in the United States' interest to make these other deals with me.
Yeah, General Keane, they're deal-making. They're clearly doing something that they're trying to figure out their economic situation, and they're trying to figure out how to get this to move on.
Yeah,
Let me interrupt. Here come the leaders. Let me interrupt you, General. Let's go live to the room here. The 2 leaders, Vladimir Putin and President Donald Trump.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, Our negotiations have been held in a constructive atmosphere of mutual respect. We had very thorough negotiations. They were quite useful. I would like to thank once again my American counterpart for the proposal to travel out here to Alaska. It only makes sense that we've met here because our countries, though separated by the oceans, are close neighbors. So when we met, when I came out of the plane and I said, "Good afternoon, dear neighbor. Very good to see you. In good health and to see you alive." I think that is very neighborly. And I think that's some kind words that we can say to each other. We're separated by the Strait of Bering, though there are 2 islands only between the Russian island and the U.S. island. They're only 4 kilometers apart. We're close neighbors, and it's a fact. It's also important that Alaska has to do with our common heritage, common history between Russia and the U.S., and many positive events have to do with that territory. Still, there is tremendous cultural heritage back from the Russian America. For example, Orthodox churches and a lot of more than 700 geographical names of Russian origin. During the Second World War, it was here in Alaska that was the origin of the legendary air bridge for the supply of military aircraft and other equipment under the Lend-Lease program. It was a dangerous and treacherous route over the vast emptiness of ice. However, the pilots of both countries did everything to bring close to the victory. They risked their lives and they gave it all for the common victory. I was just in the city of Magadan in Russia, and there was a memorial there dedicated to the Russian and the U.S. pilots. And there are 2 flags, the U.S. flag and the Russian flag. And I know that here as well, there is such a memorial. There is a military burial place several kilometers away from here. The Soviet pilots that buried there who died during that dangerous mission. We're thankful to the citizens and the government of the U.S. for carefully taking care of their memory. I think that's very worthy and noble. We'll always remember other historical examples when our countries defeated common enemies together in the spirit of battle camaraderie and allyship that supported each other and facilitated each other. I'm sure that this heritage will help us rebuild and foster mutually beneficial and equal ties at this new stage, even during the hardest conditions. It is known that there have been no summits between Russia and the U.S. for 4 years, and that's a long time. This time was very hard for bilateral relations, and let's be frank, they've fallen to the lowest point since the Cold War. I think that's not benefiting our countries and the world as a whole. It is apparent that sooner or later, we have to amend the situation to move on from the confrontation to dialogue. And in this case, a personal meeting between the heads of state has been long overdue. Naturally, under the condition of serious and painstaking work, and this work has been done in general. Me and President Trump have very good direct contact. We've spoken multiple times. We spoke frankly on the phone. And special envoy of the president, Mr. Witkoff, traveled out to Russia several times. Our advisors and heads of foreign ministries kept in touch all the time. And you know fully well that one of the central issues was the situation around Ukraine. We see the strive of the administration and President Trump personally to help facilitate the resolution of the Ukrainian conflict. And his strive to get to the crux of the matter, to understand his history, is precious. As I've said, the situation in Ukraine has to do with fundamental threats to our security. Moreover, we've always considered the Ukrainian nation, and I've said it multiple times, a brotherly nation, however strange it may sound in these conditions. We have the same roots, and everything that's happening is a tragedy for us and terrible wound. Therefore, the country is sincerely interested in putting an end to it. At the same time, we're convinced that in order to make the settlement lasting and long-term, we need to eliminate all the primary roots the primary causes of that conflict, and we've said it multiple times, to consider all legitimate concerns of Russia and to reinstate a just balance of security in Europe and in the world on the whole. And I agree with President Trump, as he has said today, that naturally the security of Ukraine should be ensured as well. Naturally, we are prepared to work on that. I would like to hope that the agreement that we've reached together will help us bring closer that goal and will pave the path towards peace in Ukraine. We expect that Kiev and European capitals will perceive that constructively and that they won't throw a wrench in the works. They will not make any attempts to use some backroom dealings to conduct provocations to torpedo the nascent progress. Incidentally, when the new administration came to power, bilateral trade started to grow. It's still very symbolic. Still, we have a growth of 20%. As I've said, we have a lot of dimensions for joint work. It is clear that the U.S. and Russian investment and business cooperation has tremendous potential. Russia and the U.S. can offer each other so much in trade, digital, high-tech, and in space exploration. We see that Arctic cooperation is also very possible, and our international context, for example, between the Far East of Russia and the West Coast of the U.S. Overall, it's very important for our countries to turn the page, to go back to cooperation. It is symbolic that not far away from here, the border between Russia and the U.S., there is a so-called international date line. I think you can step over literally from yesterday into tomorrow. And I hope that we'll succeed in that, in political sphere. I would like to thank President Trump for our joint work, for the well-wishing and trustworthy tone of our conversation. It's important that both sides are result-oriented, and we see that the President of the U.S. has a very clear idea of what he would like to achieve. He sincerely cares about the prosperity of his nation. Still, he understands that Russia has its own national interests. I expect that today's agreements will be the starting point, not only for the solution of the Ukrainian issue, but also will help us bring back business-like and pragmatic relations between Russia and the U.S. And in the end, I would like to add one more thing. I'd like to remind you that in 2022, during the last contact with the previous administration, I tried to convince my previous American colleague that the situation should not be brought to the point of no return when it would come to hostilities, and I said it quite directly back then that it's a big mistake. Today, when President Trump is saying that if he was the president back then, there will be no war, and I'm quite sure that it would indeed be so. I can confirm that. I think that overall, me and President Trump have built a very good business-like and trustworthy contact. And I have every reason to believe that moving down this path, we can come, and the sooner better, to the end of the conflict in Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. That was very profound, and I will say that I believe we had a very productive meeting. There were many, many points that we agreed on, most of them, I would say, a couple of big ones that we haven't quite gotten there, but we've made some headway. So there's no deal until there's a deal. I will call up NATO in a little while. I will call up the various people that I think are appropriate, and I'll of course call up President Zelensky and tell him about today's meeting. It's ultimately up to them. They have to agree with what Marco and Steve and some of the great people from the Trump administration who've come here, Scott and John Ratcliffe, thank you very much. But we have some of our really great leaders. They've been doing a phenomenal job. We also have some tremendous Russian business representatives here, and I think everybody wants to deal with us. We've become the hottest country anywhere in the world in a very short period of time, and we look forward to that. We look forward to dealing. We're going to try and get this over with. We really made some great progress today. I've always had a fantastic relationship with President Putin with Gladamere. We had many tough meetings, good meetings. We were interfered with by the Russia hoax that made it a little bit tougher to deal with, but he understood it. I think he's probably seen things like that during the course of his career. He's seen it all, but we had to put up with the Russia hoax. He knew it was a hoax, and I knew it was a hoax, but what was done was very criminal. But it made it harder for us to deal as a country in terms of the business and all of the things that we'd like to have dealt with. But we'll have a good chance when this is over. So just to put it very quickly, I'm going to start making a few phone calls and tell them what happened. But we had an extremely productive meeting, and many points were agreed to. There are just a very few that are left. Some are not that significant. One is probably the most significant, but we have a very good chance of getting there. We didn't get there, but we have a very good chance of getting there. I would like to thank President Putin and his entire team, whose faces, who I know in many cases, otherwise, other than that, whose faces I get to see all the time in the newspaper. You're almost as famous as the boss, but especially this one right over here. But we had some good meetings over the years, right? Good productive meetings over the years, and we hope to have that in the future. But let's do the most productive one right now. We're going to stop really 5, 6, 7,000, thousands of people a week from being killed, and President Putin wants to see that as much as I do. So, again, Mr. President, I'd like to thank you very much, and we'll speak to you very soon and probably see you again very soon. Thank you very much, Vladimir.
Next time in Moscow.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I don't know. I'll get a little heat on that one, but I could see it possibly happening. Thank you very much, Vladimir. And thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Russian president saying he and President Trump have reached a, quote, understanding on Ukraine, and had a warning for European leaders not to torpedo the nascent progress. President Trump called the meeting excellent, said there would be more things to come. However, this joint news conference was anything but. It was not a news conference. There were no questions taken by either leader. There were many yelled by reporters there, but we don't have a sense of what exactly is in this agreement or this deal. It seems like it's in the early stages, and we didn't get details about that. The reporting about President Trump making those calls to President Zelensky and other European leaders apparently was premature. The president saying that he will make those calls momentarily and brief them about the inner workings. But we didn't hear the definite second meeting with President Zelensky, at least not yet. But you heard at the end Vladimir Putin saying the next meeting is in Moscow. President Trump didn't agree to that specifically, but said maybe. We've had amazing coverage throughout the day for a special report. Everyone who worked on this show for the Air Force One interview, great job. I'm going to turn it over now to Brian Kilmeade, who's sitting in for Laura Ingram and the Ingram Angle. Brian.
Hey, Brett, quick question before you go. We had a press conference, we had an announcement, we had pleasantries between the two leaders, but we have no idea what they agreed on. He said we made progress, we had productive meetings, we agreed on many points. I'm going to call our allies. I'm not saying anything's wrong with that, but am I correct? Is we have no idea what those points are that are agreed on?
We have zero idea, which is what we call in the business a deep tease for Sean Hannity's interview of President Trump at 9 p.m. Eastern Time tonight, because hopefully he can shed some more light on what we know. We don't know much from that news conference. We had a lot of soliloquy from Vladimir Putin about here in Alaska, and that they had an excellent meeting. The Russians on Russian wire service called it exceptional, but didn't provide details. So I think there's a lot more to learn, and hopefully we'll hear from the U.S. President, but also the people in the room, like Secretary of State Rubio and Steve Witkoff and others.
Brett, is it safe to say, since he didn't come out and say this is a ceasefire, it's a cessation of violence, that that is something we didn't get all the way there? If I'm to look to what he meant by that, all the way there would have been a ceasefire?
I mean, I think they would have led with it. It would have been the thing that they would have led with, that we agree to a ceasefire. We didn't hear it. And I think that could be disappointing, potentially. We'll have to hear from President Trump. I will tell you that the Russians were talking to us, saying that they were going to maybe provide Vladimir Putin, but definitely a negotiator who was on the inside to come talk to us. That got canceled when this news conference was announced, and I should not call it a news conference because it was two statements from the two leaders. So we are at ground zero as far as knowing exactly what that agreement looks like.
And there are details. We just don't know it yet. I mean, they could have made substantial progress. I think the point is we just don't know what that is, and he wants to brief our allies. We did hear before they came out that the slight delay was him he says he was talking to Zelensky, the rumor was, and our European allies. It seems to be by his comments now, he hasn't talked to them yet.
Exactly, and that's perhaps where this is. It's not the cart before the horse, and he wants to brief Zelensky and European leaders before it comes out. But I would stay tuned closely, because I think we're going to learn a lot in a short amount of time about what's behind this agreement that they spent 3+ hours talking about in a private room.
Right, and we don't know if they blew off lunch or not, but it was a long initial meeting. Brett Baer, thanks so much. Great job. Meanwhile, senior White House correspondent Jackie Heinrich is in the room, on the ground, where the press conference just took place at Joint Base Elmendorf. Jackie, I was surprised, no questions. I was surprised, no.
About what we need to know to put the pieces together and fully understand what we all just witnessed.
Yeah, I guess you have great sources, and so does a lot of people want to try to put this thing together. The other thing is, it's really not between the U.S. and Russia, as you know, Jackie. It's between the U.S., it's between Ukraine and Russia. We're almost listening to say, is there a chance, is there a path to a ceasefire? And if not, the president's going to make evaluation from there, because he said serious sanctions come in after, and the arms are going to continue to flow. And so therefore, if Vladimir Putin thinks he's steamrolled or thinks he's got a victory, if a victory is us with more sanctions and more arms, that doesn't look like a victory to me.
No, it certainly would not be. And the president has noted rightfully that the tariffs that he threatened on secondary sanctions on big purchasers of Russian oil like India and China that really drove Putin to the negotiating table, that would drive Russia's economy from bad to worse. And the picture really inside of Russia is very bad. They are having to give sign-up bonuses to join the military that are larger than the average salary for across the country. They're running out of people. They're running out of cash. No one will buy their debt. There are any number of data points that you could reference here. And so certainly the president holds all the cards. But there were some things that Putin said that are always cause for concern. When he references things like root causes,
I know.
It's always a reference back to his ultimate goal of taking all of Ukraine. And so we'll see, though, of course. We got more out of Putin than we did from President Trump. And I expect that we'll get the full picture when he talks to Sean Hannity. Very, very grateful that he is going to be giving the full readout here soon.
Jackie, your point.
Yeah, Brian, that was different, for sure. Different than most of the pressers that President Trump has, where he's usually very straightforward and very forward-leaning and sharing all the things that he can. Clearly, he felt in this instance, to deliver on behalf of America, the best thing to do was to be quiet. I don't think we should overread that. I would also urge everyone watching, I'm sure the Russians are already out with a series of statements. They'll come out with more. Pay a little attention to what they actually say. What we ought to all focus on is what they do in the coming hours. Will there be missiles flying tonight in Ukraine? Will the Russians continue their advance? What will the Ukrainians do on the ground? I'm sure President Zelensky will get the briefing from President Trump on what actually took place. But will we see a de facto ceasefire, at least for a little while they try to, I want to make sure I get President Trump's words right, to try and iron out some of the things that still remain to be figured out. But I agree, pretty non-transparent, much that we don't know.
Right.
That does suggest there are significant roadblocks along the way that remain.
Mr. Secretary, I didn't go to KGP school. I couldn't get in. It's probably the Russian language that stopped me. But it looks as though they've been listening to the president. If in 2022 I met with President Biden, he essentially said, and I said it doesn't have to come to a war. We don't need these hostilities. But he didn't seem to care, so we had a war. So blame President Biden for that. And he also went on to say there wouldn't have been a war if President Trump had been president. That's exactly what President Trump feels. Also, they went out of their way, even before the summit, to establish in the past how America worked together in World War II, putting roses on your monument, symbolizing U.S.'s role in defeating Nazi Germany. He also went out of his way to talk about this has been the lowest point in the Cold War, but we have so much in common. Look, we're neighbors. You want to read into that a little bit?
Only this, Brian. Putin gets the joke, right? He is trying diligently to snuggle up to President Trump. He knows that President Trump holds all the cards that can bring his nation to near ruin. That, by the way, that read of World War II I've heard from Foreign Minister Lavrov so many times is laughable. Now we didn't recount the history, but they were not good actors in the aftermath of World War II, to say the least. The Soviet Union destroyed so much and did so little for its own people.
Mike Pompeo, a great former Secretary of State,
but
a great man.
All the notes he thought would matter. I think that is a misread in some ways. President Trump, while he said we have a great relationship, has been incredibly tough with respect to Russia, far more capable of deterring Vladimir Putin than Joe Biden or Barack Obama ever could. I don't suspect that what happened today or what Putin could say in some laudatory statement is going to change that, Brian.
Mr. Secretary, I just want to bring it to the one point. You know that you had a long 3 or 4 page speech from Vladimir Putin with the translator ready to go. The president, probably with a Sharpie, had a few comments and then said this of significance. Let's listen.
We had an extremely productive meeting and many points were agreed to. There are just a very few that are left. Some are not that significant. One is probably the most significant, but we have a very good chance of getting there. We didn't get there, but we have a very good chance of getting there.
So, you know President Trump. You know his body language. What are your thoughts about what he means?
I think there's still significant sticking points along the way. They may have identified interests that they can work their way through, perhaps on economic matters and the like, but it sounds to me like sort of the central issue, the thing that we've all been talking about for the days leading up to this, Vladimir Putin's willingness to conduct a ceasefire with no conditions so that they can get to the table and discuss a formal resolution of the conflict. It doesn't sound like Putin showed up today ready to concede that core point.
Yeah, we didn't get there is what he said, but we had productive meetings. I'm going to call NATO, I'm going to call the EU, European leaders, I'm going to call Zelensky. So he does have something to say, right? And soon we're going to get that, what happened and what didn't happen. And then we're going to have evaluation. It's just very different not to get that from the press conference.
Yeah, in a matter of hours, we'll have figured out precisely where they are, or at least approximately where everybody landed after today's meeting. You know, President Trump was pretty forward-leaning in terms of there being another meeting. He had said if there was no progress, he would not concede to that point. Sounds like he at least made enough progress to believe that let the teams get back together to try and suss through this. But let's watch not only what is said in the coming hours and even days, but what actions are taken. Does Vladimir Putin continue to steal Ukrainian kids and take them back to Russia? Does he continue to fight along the Donbass and Luhansk lines of contact? Does he continue to lob missiles into Kyiv? If he does that, I think President Trump will find very suspect some of the things it sounds like Vladimir Putin may well have said today.
So they both indicated there should be another meeting. I was kind of interested to get your take when President Putin recommended a venue. Watch.
Mr. President, I'd like to thank you very much, and we'll speak to you very soon and probably see you again very soon. Thank you very much, Vladimir.
Next time in Moscow.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I don't know. I'll get a little heat on that one, but I can see it possibly happening. Thank you very much, Vladimir. And thank you all. Thank you.
I think that caught him by surprise. Your thoughts?
Yeah, probably so. I'm sure President Putin would like to show up with the remaining fighters that he can still fly, and the Russian bombers, just as the Americans flew over the meeting today. Putin would probably like to return that favor and have a home and away game. I think President Trump will be pretty smart about where the venue for the next meeting, And I think it'll be important that President Zelensky be at that meeting as well. I'd be very surprised if President Zelensky, Trump, and Putin all met in Moscow. That would surprise me quite a bit. Who knows?
And a lot of people are going to talk about this. Jackie Heinrich points out, in tradition would have it, usually the home team gets to speak first. Vladimir Putin spoke first. But with the president's unorthodox way of approaching everything about the presidency, I would not look into that at all. You know, those type of things don't bother President Trump, correct?
No, diplomatic niceties are not something that's going to offend him. I think also he likely wanted the last word. I know when I was in meetings like this and there was a readout, I always wanted to be the last one to clean up anything the other person may have said that didn't ring true to me. I imagine President Trump wanted to keep that prerogative so that if President Putin said something that he found either incorrect or needed to be fixed, he'd get that last word. He certainly got that today.
Mr. Secretary, check your text messages in your email. Let us know when you get some detail, and we'll have you just bump right in. Thanks so much for being our expert, and don't go too far. Meanwhile, 22 minutes after the hour, let's bring in Fox News contributor Kellyanne Conway, Jason Chaffetz, as well as Fox and Friends weekend co-host Charlie Hurd. Kellyanne, I'll talk to you. Your sense about the fact that we did really not get any details from that press conference. Why?
Look, I think anybody's confused about how this went down is still wondering what happened at the end of that final Sopranos episode. This is exactly what President Trump said was going to happen. He said it's not his deal to make. Putin is killing innocent people in a sovereign nation. He invaded that nation, and the country that is being attacked so viciously needs to be at the table to make the final deal. The second thing the president promised and delivered upon, Brian, is that this meeting would set up the framework for the next meeting. And it is not always the case where one meeting leads to another. We've all seen President Trump be one and done. I think in addition to the art of the deal is the art of the details. And I know President Trump is going to get back on Air Force One tonight. He's not going to go to sleep at all the entire ride. We already know that. And he's going to expect everyone around him to be contributing to what the structure and the framework and what the details should be like. And I think he's going to talk to Zelensky again. He's going to talk to the other European leaders again. Look, everything came up Trump in the U.S. today. This was his meeting on U.S. soil with U.S. bombers ahead. Mm-hmm. Look at the step and repeat behind it. It says pursuing peace. Do you think Vladimir Putin wanted to stand in front of a banner on U.S. soil a foot shorter than the U.S. president in front of words that say pursuing peace? That's the goal here, but that's President Trump's goal. And the last thing I'll say is Putin, I disagree completely with who said he's got cards to play. He got the first word, the first statement. I think today the most important word to get was the last word. And President Trump was crisp and concise. You know why? Putin treated him like they're friends. Oh, the religious artifacts. Oh, you're looking so healthy and vibrant. Donald Trump was not being his jovial, jaunty self in this press conference. It was not emotional, it was transactional. And I think it's because Putin knows Trump can crush Russia's economy with primary sanctions like he's done before and these secondary sanctions for countries like India and China who are buying Russian oil. I think it's a huge win for peace today and a huge win for our president. Yeah, and when we get details, I'll know. I can't weigh in until I find out what exactly they agreed on, but they both agreed to something. Jason, let's start with you. Your thoughts about what we know so far. They both came out. I think that's actually a good line that Putin had and why they left. He goes, it's good you have good health and you're alive because of the assassination attempt, right?
No kidding. I think it's a huge win for President Trump, for the United States. There is but one superpower in this world. It's the United States of America, both militarily and economically. You had the visuals on the military side, but both President Putin and President Trump talked about the economic strength. I also don't think this is all about Ukraine. I think they probably had a discussion that was much broader than that. I think this has to do with China. I think it has to do with Israel. I think it has to do with where Vladimir.
You think they talked about all that?
I think they do mention that. I don't think they go 3 hours with maps. Well, because I think they actually go through and they want to talk about all of these places on where Russia is in the world. And we can push Russia around, because if Donald Trump decides to turn that knob and say, you're no longer going to be a participant in the world economy, then you're going to fall apart. That's why President Trump holds all the cards.
And that's why John Radcliffe going, don't you think, Jason?
Yes.
John Radcliffe going is important.
Howard Lutnick.
Because he knows what's going on in Russia. He has the intelligence. So he says, listen, I know what he's telling you, Charlie Hurt. Radcliffe could say, but I'm going to tell you the reality, what's really happening in Russia. And the CIA knows.
Yeah, and I think the big reason we're all kind of reeling right here is because
we know nothing.
Yeah, well, we know nothing, but also we're so accustomed to Donald Trump taking all these questions. The president never misses an opportunity to take questions, and so we're sort of like confused by this. But right now, normally, under normal circumstances, we would be 1/8 of the way through a reeling press conference where he answers every single question. Obviously, this is a different situation, but I also, it was interesting watching him give those remarks. He did it off the cuff. He had no notes.
He's waiting until Zelensky can be talked to by him,
before he walked out there. Read it,
so he can tell him what happened in person.
Trump was talking almost like the wheels were still churning.
I agree.
He was still like
evaluating and digesting what just took place.
But it's a reminder that Trump is not afraid of high-stakes gambles. He's always doing these high-stakes gambles, and I think he's still in the process of trying to figure out what he wants and what he can get.
Amen.
Approach to big situations.
That's true. Thank you for watching, folks. Hope you enjoyed it this evening. Travels with Dr. John Stephenson. 859-750-0000. Join us on Facebook.